Let me tell you about a morning in March 2021 in a small tasting room on the edge of Hudson, Wisconsin. The light through the window is the cold kind, the kind that comes off a river in early spring. A woman is sitting at a long pine table. Her name is Diane Brennan, and she runs a distillery her late father built with his own hands. In front of her are 4 glass tumblers. 3 of them hold a clear, bright rye whiskey. The 4th holds something darker, almost the color of dark honey, almost the color of a winter sunrise. She lifts the dark one to her nose. She closes her eyes. She breathes it in slow. She sets it down and does not say a word for a full minute. Across from her sits a younger man in a gray suit. He is a senior buyer for one of the largest spirits conglomerates in the country. He has flown in from Chicago that morning. He is here to talk about a contract. He clears his throat. He says, "Diane, we ran the numbers. We can scale this. We can be in every state by year's end." Diane opens her eyes. She does not look at him. She looks at the dark glass. She says, "Where did the grain come from?" "The rye in this one." He flips through a folder. He reads from the page. "A farm in northwest North Dakota. A man named Aaron Stenvik. Been growing it for 30 years. Just this. Nothing else." She nods slowly. She taps the dark tumbler with her finger. She says, "And the local elevator, the one near him. What did they say about his rye? Back at the start?" The buyer hesitates. He looks down at his folder. He says, "Ma'am, the file says they had a name for it." Diane finally looks up. "What did they call it?" "Junk grain." She nodded once, like she already knew, like she had known her whole adult life. She pushed 3 of the glasses away. She kept the dark one in front of her. She said, "I want the contract drawn up by Friday. I want every bushel he can give us for the next 10 years. And I want to drive up there and shake his hand myself. Because that man, the one who grew this rye, he is the reason my father had a business. He is the reason I have a business. And the world owes him a debt it does not even know it owes." Now, here is what you need to understand. 30 years before that morning in Hudson, a young man stood in a frozen field in North Dakota and was told, very gently, very kindly, that his life's work was worthless. He was told this by a woman who loved him. He was told it with concern. He was told it with hands wrapped around a coffee cup. And that, my friends, is the most dangerous way to be told a thing. This channel exists for stories like that one. Stories about the quiet ones. Stories about the people who were told no by good people, by decent people, by people who genuinely meant well, and who spent the rest of their lives turning that no into a legacy. If those stories matter to you, subscribe. Join a community that honors the long road. Because what happened to Aaron Stenvik is a lesson in how the world measures worth, and how one stubborn person working alone in the cold can prove the whole world wrong. It just takes 30 years. So let me take you back. Let me take you all the way back to the winter of 1991. The wind that January came down out of Saskatchewan with nothing to slow it. Aaron Stenvik was 32 years old. He stood in the yard of his mother's farm, 240 acres of heavy clay soil in Mountrail County, North Dakota, 10 miles east of the town of Stanley. His mother, Ingrid Stenvik, had died on the 17th of December. Lung cancer. She had smoked Lucky Strikes for 50 years, alone, out in the fields, watching the weather come down. The funeral was 3 days before Christmas. The ground was too frozen to bury her. They kept her at the funeral home until April. Aaron was a veterinarian. He had built a small practice in Bismarck, 200 miles south. He came home for the funeral planning to stay 1 week. He stayed 12 years. He stayed 30 because his mother left him 3 things. She left him the land. She left her debt. And she left him a wooden crate. 3 crates, actually. Heavy, pine, latched with old brass clasps. Inside were jars of seed, hundreds of jars, each one labeled in her tight, precise handwriting. And there were notebooks, 46 of them, every page filled, rainfall charts, pollination notes, drawings of root systems, soil temperatures by week, going back to 1963. Ingrid Stenvik had been a strange woman. Everyone in the county agreed on that, though they said it kindly. Her own grandmother had come from Norway in 1908, carrying a leather pouch of rye seed across the Atlantic. Old rye, winter rye, the kind that had fed Scandinavian farmers for 1,000 years. Ingrid had spent her whole life crossing that old Norwegian rye with stock she ordered from a seed collector in Vermont. and once in the 70s, with a sample she received from a man in Lithuania she had written to for 3 years before he answered. She called her variety Nordlys, the Norwegian word for the northern lights. The kernels were long and slender, and so dark they looked black until you held them in the sun, and then you could see the deep purple in them. Aaron sat at his mother's desk on a cold Tuesday in January, and he opened the final notebook. He read every page. He drank coffee until it was gone. Then he drank water. Then he drank coffee again. He read about her drought losses in 1980. He read about the year she got snow mold on half the crop. He read about the time she rebuilt her own combine in a single weekend. And on the last page, in handwriting that had gotten shaky toward the end, she had written one sentence. She wrote, "Winter knows what summer forgets." Aaron sat with that sentence for a long time. The wind moved against the windows. The house ticked and groaned. He had a choice in front of him, and he knew it. He could sell the land. The big operation east of Stanley had been circling for years. They would pay enough to settle the debt. He could go back to Bismarck and his practice. He could be done, or he could stay. He could plant her rye, all 240 acres. He had never farmed in his life. He went outside. He walked through her test plot behind the equipment shed. The Nordlys was still standing under the snow, last fall's stubble dark and stiff. He bent down. He pulled up a stalk. He held it in his gloved hand, and he made a decision, the kind of decision a person makes only once or twice in a life. He decided to stay. He decided to plant her rye. And he decided that the first thing he was going to do, come summer, was walk into the local grain elevator with a sample and shake the hand of the woman who would buy it from him at harvest. Because that was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. He did not know yet that the world was not going to make it that simple. He did not know that the kindest woman in Mountrail County was about to break his heart with a cup of coffee and a soft voice. But that's not what this story is really about. This story is about what a man does after that. Winter rye is one of the oldest cultivated grains in human history, going back more than 2,000 years in Northern Europe. It survives in soils and climates where other grains will not. Heritage varieties, like the one Aaron's mother bred, are open-pollinated, meaning farmers can save seed year after year without buying new stock. This kind of seed saving was the foundation of agriculture for most of human history, but it largely vanished in the United States after the rise of patented hybrid varieties in the mid-20th century. A handful of families like the Stenviks kept the old genetics alive, quietly, in their own fields, for decades. Now here's what you need to understand about Margaret Holloway. She was not a villain. She was not a small woman, or a cruel one. She was, by every honest measure, one of the finest people in Mountrail County. She ran the regional grain elevator in Stanley. She had run it for 26 years. Before that, she had been an agronomist at North Dakota State University. She had walked away from a tenure track to come home and work in the real dirt with real farmers. She was 58 years old in the summer of 1991. She was a deaconess at First Lutheran. She had organized the food drive for 30 winters. She had loaned money out of her own checkbook to farmers she knew were going to lose anyway, just so their kids could finish out the school year in the same house. She had known Ingrid Stenvik. She had liked Ingrid. She had brought a casserole to the house the week of the funeral, and she had stood in the cold parlor and held Aaron's hands in both of hers and told him, "Your mother was a good woman, a strange one, but a good one. You come see me when you're ready to talk about what comes next." In August, when the test plot was ripe, Aaron walked into her office at the elevator with a small canvas sack of Nordlys rye. He set it on her desk. The office smelled like coffee and grain dust. Outside, a truck was being weighed on the scale. Margaret looked up. She smiled at him. She had a kind face, lined deep around the eyes, the kind of face that had heard 1,000 farmers tell her about bad years and worse ones. She said, "Aaron, sit down. What have you got there?" He sat. He pushed the bag across to her. He said, "Mom's rye, the Nordlys. I'm planting it this fall. All of it. I wanted to make sure you'd take it next summer at harvest." Margaret reached into the bag. She let the long, dark kernels run through her fingers. She held some up to the light and turned them. She was quiet for a long time. Aaron's whole body was listening to that silence. Then she set the kernels down. She folded her hands. She looked at him with eyes that were full of something that, if you had not known what it was, you might have mistaken for love. She said, "Aaron, honey, your mother was one of the most brilliant women I ever knew. I mean that. She forgot more about plant genetics than most of my old colleagues at the university ever learned. But this, she tapped the bag with one finger. This was her project. This was her garden. This wasn't a commercial crop. Aaron said, "It's good rye, Margaret. It survives anything. It tastes different. It has a story." She nodded gently. She said, "I'm sure it does. But honey, look at the test weight on this. 51 pounds a bushel. Modern rye is 56, 58. The kernel size is all over the place. The moisture comes off uneven. I can't run this through my dryers without recalibrating the whole line. And if I mix it into the silo with the rest of the rye in this county, I bring down the grade for every farmer who's banking on that check. I cannot do that to my members, Aaron. You know I can't." She pushed the bag back across the desk. "And the yield, Aaron, 28 bushels an acre. Conventional rye is hitting 60. You will not cover your fertilizer, much less the mortgage your mother left on that ground. I am not going to be the woman who signs the papers that helps Ingrid Stenvik's only son lose the family farm. I will not do it. I love you too much. Plant the standard variety. Plant what everyone else is planting. Take care of yourself." She reached across the desk and she put her hand on top of his. Her hand was warm. Her eyes were wet. She meant every word of it. "Now here is what I want you to sit with for a moment. Have you ever been told you couldn't do something? Not by an enemy, not by a rival, by somebody who held your hand while they said it, by somebody who cried a little because they were so sure they were saving you. Kindness wrapped around certainty is a cage with no bars and no door. You cannot fight it with anger, because anger looks like ingratitude. You cannot argue against its logic, because the logic is sound, and the person on the other side of the table does not see you as an opponent. They see you as a child who is about to walk off a cliff, and they love you, so they are putting their hand out to stop you. There is a particular kind of fury that builds inside a person in that moment, and it is silent, and it does not look like fury at all. It looks like a quiet young man picking up a bag of seed and saying, "Thank you," very softly, and walking out of an office on a hot August afternoon. Tell me in the comments if you have ever felt that. If somebody good has ever, with the very best of intentions, told you what you were not capable of. Because that, right there, that is the moment a story actually starts. Aaron drove home. The truck radio was off. The bag of rye sat on the passenger seat, and the seat belt was buckled around it because his mother had always done that with anything she cared about. He pulled into the lane. He sat in the truck for a long time and watched the sun go down over the wheat stubble across the road. He thought about selling. He thought about going back to Bismarck. He thought about his clean little veterinary practice with its predictable Tuesdays. The doubt was a real thing, a physical weight in his chest, and Margaret's hand on top of his was still warm on his skin. He went inside. The house smelled like his mother's pipe tobacco and old paperback books. He sat at her desk. He opened the final notebook to the last page. Winter knows what summer forgets. He read it 3 times, and he understood finally that she had not written it as a sad thing. She had written it as an instruction. The dirt under his boots. That dirt, the elevator did not own. The bank did not own. Margaret Holloway did not own. The seed in the crates did not belong to any market in America. They belonged to him. They had belonged to his great-grandmother, who carried them in a leather pouch across an ocean. He made a second decision that night. Sitting at her desk, with the cold coming in around the window frames, he decided he would never again walk into a building and ask permission to grow his family's grain. If the elevator would not take it, he would find someone, somewhere in this country, who would. He would build his own market from nothing. He did not know how. He did not know who. He just knew he was done asking. Grain elevators have served as the central economic institution of American farming towns since the 1870s. They handle storage, drying, pricing, and shipping for hundreds of small producers at once. Because they aggregate grain into massive uniform lots for sale to industrial buyers, they are structurally biased against any crop that breaks uniformity, even when that crop is more nutritious, more sustainable, or more valuable in specialty markets. For most of the 20th century, this system priced heritage grains out of existence, since farmers could not sell what the elevator would not buy. The winter of 1991 into 92 was the longest of Aaron Stenvik's life. He had no internet. Nobody did. He had a public library in Stanley with a microfiche reader and a card catalog, and a librarian named Mrs. Kjelsberg who took an interest in him. He told her what he was looking for, and she pulled down old USDA bulletins from the 1930s, agricultural extension pamphlets, and a stack of catalogs from defunct seed companies. He learned slowly that the rye his mother bred was not a freak. It was a return. Before Prohibition, before the war, American whiskey makers had used grain exactly like Nordlys. High in oil, slow to ferment, long, complex finish. The reason the rye whiskey of the 1890s tasted like it did was because of grain like his. Most of those distilleries had closed by 1935 and never come back, but a few were starting up again. Small operations, run by men and women who had given up other careers to chase a particular flavor. Aaron made a list, 60 distilleries scattered across 22 states. He sat at his mother's desk every night that winter and he wrote 60 letters by hand. He put a tablespoon of Nordlys rye in each envelope. He paid for the postage out of his savings. Most never wrote back. 12 sent polite rejections. One letter came back marked addressee deceased. Then, on the 14th of March, 1992, a letter arrived from a place called Coldwater Distilling in Hudson, Wisconsin. It was 3 sentences long. It was signed by a man named Caleb Brennan. The letter said, "Mr. Stenvik, your rye is interesting. I am not promising anything, but if you plant it this fall and harvest it next summer, I will drive out and look at it." That was it. No price, no contract. A door that was barely open. For Aaron, that crack of light was enough. That spring, he planted his mother's rye on the home quarter, 60 acres of it. The first time anyone had planted Nordlys at scale in 3 generations. He worked from dawn to full dark. He fixed the old planter himself by feel, the way she had taught him to do small surgery on a calf. The neighbors watched. They drove past slowly. They talked at the cafe in Stanley. Aaron Stenvik's planting that weird purple rye of his mother's. Ingrid would be proud, but Lord, that boy is going to lose the place. He heard the talk. He never answered it. The summer of '92 was bone dry. Conventional rye in the county burned up by mid-July. Aaron's Nordlys, with its deep old roots that his mother had been selecting for 30 years, stayed dark green through August. By harvest, half the farms in Mount Rail County had cut their losses. Aaron stood at the edge of his field on a cold morning in September and watched a sea of dark purple-black heads bend in the wind. And for the first time since his mother had died, he cried. Right there, standing in the road. 60 acres of rye that the elevator had told him was junk. But he had a problem. His mother's old combine, a Massey Ferguson 760 from 1978, was set up for short kernel wheat. The Nordlys heads were longer, the stalks taller and tougher. The machine would shred it. He could not afford a new combine. He drove 3 hours to Minneapolis to see an old woman his mother had written about in her notebooks. Her name was Vera Doksait. She was Lithuanian, in her 70s, and she ran a small mill in the warehouse district that had been grinding heritage flours since 1964. Aaron's grandmother had once helped Vera's family get their immigration papers in order, back when nobody else would. Vera remembered that. She came home with Aaron in her pickup all the way to North Dakota, with her toolbox in the bed. She and Aaron spent 11 days in the equipment shed. She showed him how to slow down the cylinder speed, how to widen the concave clearance, how to weld up a custom feeder housing out of scrap angle iron. They did not modernize the combine. They made it older. They made it work the way machines had worked in 1950. When they were done, Vera wiped her hands on a shop towel. She would not take any money. She said, "Your grandmother saved my mother. We are square now. Cut your rye." And she got in her truck and drove home. He cut his 60 acres, 3,400 bushels of long, dark, oily rye, sitting in the old grain bin behind the barn. He waited. 8 days later, a station wagon pulled into the lane. A tall, thin man in a wool coat got out. Caleb Brennan walked straight past Aaron without shaking his hand, walked into the field, pulled ahead, rubbed it in his palms, and tasted a kernel raw. He chewed it slowly. He stood there for 12 minutes without speaking. Aaron has told this story 100 times since, and he always says, 12 minutes. He counted. Finally, Caleb turned around. He had tears in his eyes. He said, "The elevator wouldn't take this, would they?" Aaron said, "No." Caleb said, "Good. How much do you have?" 3,400 bushels. Caleb said, "I will pay you 4 times the market price for number 2 rye for every bushel of it. Cash, in an envelope, today. And next year, I want every bushel you can grow. Aaron found his voice. It was quiet. He said, "You don't have to pay up front. Pay me at harvest. I'll grow it." Caleb shook his head slow. "Mr. Stenvik, I have been looking for this rye for 9 years. You pay me at harvest. Today, I pay you." They shook hands in the dust of the equipment shed. And that, my friends, was the beginning. But this story is not about one harvest. This story is about 30 years of harvests. Let me walk you through them. 1993. Aaron planted 120 acres. Caleb bought all of it. Cash. 1995. Aaron bought the quarter section east of his from a retiring neighbor, paid him at the kitchen table in cash. Margaret Holloway heard about it. She told people it was a fluke. She said the boy got lucky one good year. 1997. Coldwater Distilling won its first regional medal for a rye whiskey called Northern Light. The judges' notes described an oily mouthfeel, an unusual spice, a complex finish reminiscent of dark bread and aniseed. They credited the grain. Caleb mailed Aaron a copy of the certificate and a bonus check. Aaron used the money to buy a used John Deere tractor. He paid cash. 2000. Aaron was farming 600 acres. 2005, 1100. He owed the bank nothing. He had no creditors. He answered only to the weather and to a quiet man in Hudson, Wisconsin, who saw treasure in what the rest of the county had called junk. His neighbors had stopped talking. They were watching. They saw new grain bins going up on the Stenvik place, taller than the ones at the elevator. They saw the unmarked trucks coming up from Wisconsin every September. They saw a man with no debt in a decade when half the county was being foreclosed. Margaret Holloway watched too. She did not drive past the farm on purpose. She just took the long way home. She remembered the bag of rye on her desk. She remembered her hand on top of his. She felt something she could not yet name. It was not regret. Not yet. It was a small crack in a wall she had built her entire career on. She had been so sure. She had been so kind. She had been so completely wrong. And the evidence of her wrongness was a young man in a dirty Carhartt jacket building a quiet empire 10 miles east of her office. In 2014, a national spirits conglomerate offered Caleb Brennan $28 million for Coldwater Distilling. Caleb was 61. He was tired. He was ready to retire. He had one condition for the sale. Just one. A 30-year ironclad contract for Aaron Stenvik at the same price formula they had used since 1992. The buyer agreed without arguing. They knew exactly where the magic was. By 2018, Aaron was farming 1,800 acres of Nordlys rye, and a bottle of Stenvik's Northern Light whiskey sold for $180 on the shelf, with his farm engraved on the label. And that's when everything changed. The shift from commodity grain to specialty heritage grain is one of the quietest economic revolutions in American agriculture. Between 2000 and 2020, the market for heritage and identity-preserved grains grew from less than $50 million annually to over $1.1 billion. Distilleries and craft bakers led the demand. The farmers who survived this shift were almost always those who, like Aaron, had built direct relationships with end users rather than selling through the conventional elevator system. The middle layer of American grain trading was where the value was lost. In April of 2021, Margaret Holloway was 88 years old. The elevator she had run for 26 years had closed in 19, swallowed by an out-of-state agricultural services company that immediately consolidated operations and laid off everyone she had ever hired. She lived alone in a small ranch house on the edge of Stanley. Her husband had been dead 9 years. She read in the mornings. She walked to the post office. She drank her coffee black, and she said her prayers, and she had stopped going to the cafe because she did not like the conversations there anymore. A man knocked on her door on a Tuesday morning. He was in his 30s, in a suit that did not fit the wind. He introduced himself as a regional manager for the conglomerate that had bought Coldwater Distilling. He was looking, he said, for someone who knew Aaron Stenvik. Someone who could maybe broker a conversation because, he explained, the demand for Nordlys rye had outrun supply. The company wanted to bring in other local farmers under Aaron's supervision. They could save the small family farms in Mount Rail County. They could rebuild the rural economy. They just needed Aaron to agree. Margaret listened. She held her coffee with both hands. When he was done, she set the cup down. She said, "Young man, I am the last person on earth Aaron Stenvik would want to hear from." He asked her why. She told him. She told him the whole thing. The bag of rye on her desk. Her hand on top of his. The phrase junk grain. She told him. in a voice that was very steady and very tired, that 30 years ago she had told the son of her oldest friend that his mother's life work was worthless, and she had said it kindly, and she had been wrong about every word of it, and she had spent the last 15 years of her career watching him prove it without ever saying so much as one word against her. The man in the suit did not know what to say. Margaret stood up. She put on her coat. She picked up her car keys. She said, "But I will go see him. Today. Because I owe him that. I owe his mother that. And I have owed it for 30 years." She drove 10 miles east on the gravel road. The lane to the Stenvik place was paved now. The farmhouse had a new roof. The barns were painted white with red trim. There were 3 grain bins behind the equipment shed, each one bigger than the last one. She pulled in and shut off the engine and sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. Aaron came out of the shop in a clean barn coat. He was 62 now. His hair had gone white in the temples. He recognized her car. He stood very still for a moment in the open doorway. Then he walked across the yard to meet her. They stood there, 2 old people, in a wind that came down out of Saskatchewan with nothing to slow it. They had known each other for 60 years. The history between them hung in the air like dust. Margaret spoke first. Her voice was small. "Aaron, the new company that bought cold water. They came to see me. They want to bring more local farms into your operation. They think it could save a lot of families. I told them I was the wrong person to ask, but I came anyway. I came to tell you that I was wrong. About all of it. 30 years ago, I sat across from you in my office, and I told you your mother's rye was worthless. And I told you with my hand on top of yours. And I have thought about that day every single week of my life since. I am sorry, Aaron. I am so sorry." Aaron looked at her for a long time. He did not look angry. He did not look proud. He looked tired, and he looked kind, and he looked somehow like his mother. He finally spoke. His voice was quiet. It was not accusatory. It was just a statement of fact. He said, "Margaret, 30 years ago, you told me my mother's rye would ruin the grade for everyone at the elevator. You said it would hurt the co-op." He paused. He looked at the bins behind the shop. It turned out it was the only thing that could have saved it. He did not say anything else. He did not have to. In that moment, standing in that yard, Margaret Holloway understood. The way a person understands a thing only once in their life. The actual price of certainty. It was not about money. It had never been about money. It was about vision. She had looked at a bag of rye on her desk and she had seen a liability. Ingrid Stenvik had looked at the same rye and she had seen a legacy. Aaron had spent 30 years making that legacy real. The cost of Margaret's kindness was a whole world that had almost not existed. She nodded. She said, "I know, honey, I know." And she got in her car and she drove home. And they never spoke about it again. The reckoning was quiet, the way all real reckonings are. But the story does not end there. Aaron did not agree to bring the conglomerate's offer through any elevator or co-op system. He could not. The trust was broken, and trust like that does not come back. What he did instead was different. He used the leverage the contract gave him to build something his mother had imagined in her notebooks, but had never had the time to make real. He called it the Stenvik Heritage Grain Network. He selected 22 small family farms, all within 100 miles of Stanley, all on the edge of going under. He gave them seed. He taught them how to grow it. He guaranteed them a market and a price. He took no fee from them at all. He saved every one of those farms. He created a rural economy that ran not on volume, but on flavor and on story, and on the slow, patient knowledge of dirt that remembers what people forget. The old elevator, Margaret's elevator, the corporation that bought it, shut it down in 22. The silos still stand on the edge of Stanley. They are empty. Pigeons live in them now. They are a quiet monument to a way of measuring worth that did not survive. Aaron Stenvik is in his 60s now. He still farms, but his daughter Astrid runs the day-to-day. She is the 5th generation on that land. Her son, who is 11, can already name every variety of rye in his great-grandmother's seed crates. On the old oak desk in the farmhouse, the desk Ingrid Stenvik used to sit at, there is a notebook open to its last page. The ink is faded now. The paper is soft. Winter knows what summer forgets. And next to the notebook sits one dark blue bottle. The label has an engraving of the farm in winter, the bins, the barn, the long fields under snow. The label reads, Stenvik's Northern Light, distilled from Nordlys rye, North Dakota, A reporter from a magazine asked Aaron a few years ago what the lesson of his life was. He thought about it for a long time. He was a quiet man. He did not give speeches. Finally, he said, in plain words, "My mother used to say winter knows what summer forgets." I think what she meant was, the things people throw out when life gets easy are the things that save you when it gets hard. Right now, somewhere in this country, a young person with a strange idea is sitting across a desk from a good, kind, decent person in a position of authority. And that good person is about to tell them no. They are about to put a warm hand on top of their hand. They are about to protect them from a risk. They are about to save them from a foolish dream. The most dangerous limit in a person's life is the one set on them by someone who genuinely believes they are helping. You cannot fight it with anger. You can only outlast it. With decades of quiet, relentless work. With faith in the things the world has decided to forget. The story of Aaron Stenvik is not really about rye. It is about the distance between what you are capable of and what other people, even the kindest ones, have decided you are. If you have ever stood in that distance, subscribe to this channel. We tell the stories for the ones who play the long game. Leave a comment and tell us about a time you had to prove a kind person wrong, gently, by living the answer instead of arguing it. And share this with one person who needs to hear it. Someone who is sitting in that office today. Someone who needs to remember that winter, in the end, always knows. Winter always remembers. And so does the dirt under our feet, on every farm, in every state, in every season we choose to keep planting through. Heritage grain networks like the one Aaron built have emerged in pockets across the rural United States in the last 2 decades. They typically operate on direct contracts between growers and end users such as distilleries, bakeries, and specialty millers, bypassing the conventional commodity system entirely. The economic model rewards quality, regional identity, and seed sovereignty rather than raw volume. For the small farms that participate, the price premium can be 3 to 5 times the conventional rate, often making the difference between survival and foreclosure. The model is slow to scale, but it has proven durable in regions where it has taken root.